Hey, another episode of My Methods. An unusual alteration. This kilt was brought to me by an old friend of mine who'd worn it at his wedding 35 years ago. He's going to be wearing it at his daughter's wedding in a couple of months. He's kept his figure admirably, but he's put on about 4 inches in 35 years, not too bad. So I thought initially I could just let out the aprons because we have a deep pleat and we've got extra material on either side, on both sides. So I took a lot of time taking out the lining, taking out the canvas, which was rather curiously done. I'd noticed that this thing had been hemmed, and after a moment's thought, I'd remember him asking me something like over 40 years ago when we were cadets together about shortening kilts. And at that time I was still doing my apprenticeship and I didn't have an answer, so he'd obviously taken it to somebody to get hemmed. Initially I thought I was going to be able to just ignore that and carry on, but when I was going through this, I discovered that the complications started to mount up. So as I was undoing the aprons, I thought, again, there's extra material in the aprons, I can just open it up. So the inner apron, not much of a problem. Press it flat, remeasure, resew it. There's not a lot of material on the outside. But then when I get to the outer apron, initially no problem. I open up that first seam and all that lovely extra material. But then when I start to open up the outside edge, disaster strikes. And I've seen this before and I've commented this before. We can see what this person, I'm not going to call him a kilt maker, has done. Rather than lay the cloth out in a S shape so that all of this would be one piece of material that we could let out, they've drawn the line, they've added barely half an inch, and then cut it, and then sewn it to this piece, and that means that I can't open this up. I can't make the apron any bigger. It's going to look terrible. So what to do? I stared at it for a while because, of course, I've reached the point where I can go back, but it's difficult to go back, and I still need to alter this thing for him. But when I count the pleats, I see that the errors have compounded. That this is an even number of pleats, and that this center line, which matches the center line of the front apron, but it's not centered in the kilt because there's 13 pleats on this side and there's 12 pleats on that side. So this is off-centered. So what I believe now I'm going to do is initially I hadn't told them to what lengths that I'm going to have to go, but I'm going to have to go the full distance on this one. I'm going to unpick this 8 yards of delicate stitching it's machine stitching, unfortunately, with so-called invisible thread, which is a monofilament like fishing line, and it's really difficult because this is stronger than the cloth, and I can't just rip it because I'll tear the cloth. So I'm going to have to pick that out carefully. I'm going to press it flat, so I'm going to restore it. Fortunately, they haven't cut the cloth. We still have the selvage edge at the bottom, so I'm going to unpick that whole length. I'm going to press it flat, and then measuring down, because fortunately this kilt, he'd had to hem it. It's too long for him, so I can shorten it to just below this red line, which means then that I can unpick this pleat, which, although it'll cost me 1 half-inch pleat, it's going to add about 8 inches of cloth, so that I'll be able to take the middle of the front apron from this line and bring it to this line, so it'll still be symmetric with the back of the kilt, but it'll have the extra cloth that I can go back to my original plan of opening the apron out to be a wider piece. Because the only other thing I'd be able to do would be have to pick all of these completely apart, press it flat, and then remeasure and then resew the pleats. And the problem is, in common with workmanship of that time, because this kilt was made in the early 70s, there isn't a dreadfully large seam allowance here. So if I had to resort to that, pulling this apart, pressing it flat and resewing it, it would be hellaciously difficult because the series of gaps in the back of the cloth. I'm not looking forward to that. I'm going to avoid it at all possible. So wish me luck. Away we go.